Thank you for joining us. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. So if you haven't seen the first part, I encourage you to check that out, or you can just watch this part 2 and watch the first part later. It's not something that has to be watched sequentially, but the quick synopsis is this. I am going through terms that I believe, in my most humble opinion, many Christians just don't understand. So let's get back into the list, shall we? The next term that Christians just don't understand is gaslighting. And I'm sorry, but if you really understood what gaslighting is, so much of what happens in your churches would be scary as hell to you. And I know that sounds like a low blow. It sounds like a dig. But here's the simple analogy I'm going to give you, and we're going to move on from this one. If your daughter came home with a new boyfriend, and the boyfriend acted just like religion does to us, you would want her to get the hell away from that boyfriend. If that boyfriend, her new boyfriend, said, hey, just trust me. If the boyfriend said, I'm never going to see you, you just have to trust that I'm there. You need to have faith. If the boyfriend said, I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything for you that you should measure, but you should still keep asking me silently every day to do things for you, you tell her to get the hell away. If the boyfriend said that she should disregard the functioning of her logical mind and replace it with whatever he says because she should have faith, you would want her to get the hell away from him. And yet, if that boyfriend isn't a boyfriend, but it's her new Christian denomination, you feel happy for her for some reason. The next baffling Christian term is genocide. At this point, I really don't know what Christians define as genocide, because trying to get them to actually tell you anything that qualifies as genocide is pretty damn difficult. The next term that Christians don't seem to understand, or at least cannot agree on, is God. I guess this is predictable. And I mentioned earlier in the video that probably to some extent, every religion in the world is defined by the different beliefs of every single person who's in that religion. But I really feel like more so than other religions I have been exposed to, if you talk to 100 Christians and ask them about God, you will either get 100 different answers, or you will get this generic kind of fluffy answer like God is love, which has no connection whatsoever to the Bible. They will spew a whole bunch of beautiful, wonderful language, flowery stuff, and yet it has no connection to the God that we actually see explicitly called out, defined, and explained in the Bible. So either God is everything to all people, which means that they don't really know what God is, or God is this wonderful, flowery hippie type, which doesn't come from the Old Testament, and it doesn't even come from the New Testament. So I'm not sure exactly what they think or who they think God is. Along those same lines, remember I said sometimes these beautifully go in order, even though they're just alphabetical. If you can show me 2 Christians who agree on heaven and or hell, I will show you the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, and a righteous member of the Trump administration. I don't know if there's any concept in the Bible that is more fractured, in my opinion, than heaven and or hell. I mean, some Christians will tell you there is no hell, or that only certain people go to it, but the rest of everyone else is annihilated who didn't quite get into heaven. Even when we talk about what's in hell, some will tell you that maggots will eat their flesh, even though that comes from a part of Isaiah that they don't seem to understand. I released a video just recently talking about this. Some Christians think that Sheol is hell. It is not. Some Christians think that Gehenna is hell. Well, Gehenna is the term that was almost always used by Jesus. But if you understand what Gehenna is, and then you compare it to modern day versions of hell, they have little in common. A lot of Christians have this kind of default cultural identity or memory that comes from things like Dante's Inferno, even though that is fiction. Most of that is just all made up. And these same problems come about with heaven. even asking Christians, when do you go to heaven or hell? Is it directly after you die? Is it at the time of judgment? I mean, you will get opinions that are just all over the board. This next phrase, I don't know if Christians don't know what it means, but I can't remember the last time I heard a Christian actually use it. The phrase is, I don't know. I don't know what it is about this desperate need to define the universe, even if the terms that you defined it in are ridiculous, completely unverifiable, and outside any of the bounds of reality. But people will come up with any solution in their mind that they can, rather than just say, I don't know. What's even worse is Christians will come up with the most magical solutions. Their sky daddy who lives outside of space and time, he created all of the cosmos. They somehow will then throw that in your face and say, see, Christianity has more explanatory power, as though you get points for coming up with the most ridiculous, unverifiable explanation that anyone could possibly make up. And somehow that makes your answers better than me just telling you, I don't know. It is baffling to me to this day how people will cling to any explanation that they can find rather than just say, I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll have to wait for more information. Maybe we'll never know. The idea that you could ever bring up questions, especially deep questions about the cosmos, and people might never get the answer seems to terrify people. And I think that's really sad. The next term that Christians don't seem to understand is inspiration, or at least particularly in regard to divine inspiration. I love the way this gets thrown about all the time. There's a tree right outside my house. If I came to this camera today and I said to you, you know, I was looking at that tree and it's very pretty and it has inspired me to write a poem. I think we know what that means. I looked at the tree. It was nice. I wrote a poem. That doesn't even necessarily mean that the poem I wrote was even about a tree. It might have been that just by looking at the tree and it was pretty and it got me thinking about all sorts of things, I might have gone and written a poem about something that didn't have anything to do with the tree, but it just got my gears flowing. Even if I tell you that this poem about a tree was inspired by me looking at the tree, do you then assume that the tree magically moved my hand and somehow made me write the exact words on the page? Or do you assume that I, as an independent agent, while thinking about this pretty tree, just decided to write a poem of my own volition that isn't actually written by the tree? In fact, in any other area of life, if I tell you that I was inspired to write something by anyone else, by a person, by a tree, whatever, do you ever believe that that leads to a supernatural use of my hand by the thing that inspired me? That makes no sense. And yet, when Christians talk about how their Bible came to be, they always say that it was divinely inspired, but they're using inspiration in a very funny way when they say this. They don't mean that men sat around and thought about God. They don't mean that they were inspired to write great things for God. No, they are somehow twisting that to mean that God worked through their hand, which is a really clunky apparatus for a God that is supposedly omnipotent. The next term that Christians just don't seem to understand is judgment. They'll tell you all day that it's God's judgment, that only he can judge. And yet, they still can't help but judge everyone all the time. And I don't just mean in your own mind, because judgment is a human thing. We can't avoid it. You look at people, you look at situations, you process things in your brain. Of course, you cast judgment, at least internally. You come to judgments in your brain. That's totally understood. But no, Christians assume then that not only am I allowed to, but it is somehow my Christian duty to make sure that everyone knows what my judgment is upon them. Yeah, get over yourself. The next term that's a source of confusion for so many Christians is miracle. And then this goes a couple different ways. First of all, if you are a Christian and you desire badly enough to feel like God is working in your life, suddenly anything can become a miracle. Oh, you got that job offer? Well, that's a miracle. Oh, that sniffle that you had this morning cleared up, that's a miracle. I mean, I'm not saying that all Christians do this, but if you want to believe things bad enough, and even if you want to believe that it's a miracle, well, then by golly, you're going to believe that it was a miracle. But beyond that, whenever you have discourse between Christians and atheists, a common talking point is something like this. Well, if I could prove that this miracle happened, then would you believe? That makes no sense. Miracles, by definition, are those things that happen in the supernatural realm. I mean, you may witness them somehow in the natural realm, but they are supernatural in terms of however they supposedly operate. They are things that are supposedly impossible to happen without supernatural interference. But if I could prove that a miracle happened, then it would no longer be supernatural. It would just be natural. Now, I may not know how it happened. I may not understand the mechanisms for how it happened. That part may be a mystery, at least for a little while, but that means it would no longer be a miracle. It means it would just be something we haven't explained yet. Despite the impressive advance of science over the last several hundred years, there are still plenty of things that we can't explain. There are still things that baffle even our best scientists. But that doesn't mean we call them miracles. That just means that those aren't things that we've figured out yet. It means that there are still mysteries in this universe, natural mysteries in this universe to solve. And isn't that a good thing? It really feels like such a sad lack of imagination and a sad flattening of the world when you have to aspire things that you don't understand to miracles. To me, it is far more intriguing to think of all the splendor and the wonder in this natural world and to know that there are things that we don't understand yet. There are things that maybe we will never understand, like when you get down to things like the quantum realm. I mean, that shit is freaky as hell. But that doesn't mean that they're miracles. It just means that it imbues the universe with an even greater sense of awe and wonder, because no matter how much we learn, there are always new things to learn. But that's entirely different than trying to claim that we could or ever will prove your miracles. The next term that Christians just don't seem to understand is morality. Ooh, that's spicy, isn't it? I don't know how many times I've seen this takes that, oh, if God says it, then it was moral. And if God doesn't want it done, then it's not moral. That's not morals. And I know there's a term for this. It's called divine command theory, but that's exactly what it is. It's a command. If you can't figure out what is right and wrong when you don't have a command in front of you from your Bible, then it's not a moral. Then it's you just blindly following instructions from your magic sky daddy. That's not morality. That's actually amorality. I'm not saying it's immoral, although in some cases it is. It's amoral. When I was a enlisted person in the Air Force and you just get there, all you do is what you're ordered to do. You don't even have time to do anything but what you're ordered to do. That doesn't mean that I was operating in a moral fashion. I wasn't operating in an immoral fashion either. But the way that I was operating as a young airman in the Air Force was amorally, meaning I was just told what to do. You don't think. You go here, you go there, wherever they tell you to go. You do this, you do that, whatever they tell you to do. That's not moral or immoral. It's amorality. And if you don't understand that, you should grow the hell up and figure out how to have some morals of your own. Because for all the preaching that Christians do about atheists can't have morals, and then they turn around and pull this crap where all their morality, supposedly, comes from whatever they can infer from their magic book. Okay, so we're going to lump these together, and these are big topics, but another thing that Christians do not understand is what I call the omnis, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, omnibenevolence. They love to attribute all those things to their magic, all-loving, all-wonderful God. And yet there are so many instances from your own holy scripture that absolutely refute all of these qualities. I'm not even going to go through them all here again. These are subjects for other videos. But if you think that God is omnipotent, read the text. If you think that he's omniscient, read the text. If you think he's omnipresent or omnibenevolent, read the text. It's not hard. There are so many contradictions there. And the funny thing is that this idea of these omnis, it was never there at the beginning of the Old Testament. It was something that was imposed on the religion as theological thought throughout the region evolved over millennia with heavy influence from Zoroastrianism and from the Greco-Roman period, where they started to bring on new ideas of what they thought God or gods were. And this idea of omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, they got bolted into the religion. And again, if you don't believe that, read the damn book. I can't get into it all here at this point, but it's too deep a subject. But there are so many contradictions. And the funny thing is, if you let go of this fantasy of a God who is omnipotent, omnipresent, all the omnis, it's funny how much more of the text actually makes sense. So many of the other contradictions and moral quandaries go away if you realize that this isn't a being who's everywhere. Like the problem of suffering, that goes away if you don't assume that your God controls every electron in every quantum molecule that's popping into, this quantum realm or what have you. If you start to realize that God doesn't pull every dang string in your life, many of the objections that people have to religion in general and Christianity specifically start to melt away. But if you cling to those so desperately, it brings up this whole host of other problems that cannot be solved in your text. The next term that Christians just don't seem to understand is prophecy. If you talk to most Christians, they will tell you that Jesus fulfilled all this prophecy. And I'm going to be honest with you. For 40 years of being a Christian, I kind of took a lot of this at face value. Even though I had read the Bible multiple times, I didn't know where the prophecies were. They never stood out to me. But I was told over and over again that he fulfilled all this prophecy. Like it wasn't one prophecy. It was this breathtaking amount of prophecy, which was always confusing to me because I didn't even remember that much prophecy in the book. I mean, it's there. There are prophecies in the book, but it wasn't like this huge book of nothing but prophecies. But they told me that there was just all this prophecy that Jesus magically fulfilled. But when you research it, oh my gosh, is it wrong? It's not even prophecy. It's not that there's 1,000 prophecies and he didn't fulfill them, although there are certainly cases of that. But the deeper problem is that they point to all this stuff that's not prophecy. They pull together these vague correlations from this verse in Exodus to that verse in Matthew, and they're not even the same thing. And the first verse in the Old Testament isn't even a prophecy. This is not hard, people. If you don't know what a prophecy is, let me tell you. It's someone saying, and lo, I say unto you, this thing will happen. Now, granted, even the best prophecies are usually ridiculously vague, right? Because no one ever gives a prophecy that says the Messiah will come in the year 19. In May, on the 5th, he'll be born. And, they don't give all these details because even the best prophets know that they have to hedge their bets a little bit here. But even when you account for the ridiculous vagueness that is in any prophecy, and that's not just Christianity, any prophecy in the world is always this kind of vague eye of the beholder crap. Even when you account for all of that, almost everything that they lay out as a so-called prophecy isn't even a prophecy. There's no prediction. There's no one saying that this thing will happen, or this is when it will happen, or this is what will come to pass. No, it's just somebody 1,000 years or 2,000 years later drawing these incredibly weak connections between bits of text where the original one isn't even a prophecy and the part they're connecting to is not even a fulfillment of anything. The next thing that Christians don't understand or refuse to is Psalms. Now, that may feel weird to you. Like, Christians know what the Psalms are, right? It's a book in the Bible. But over and over and over again, I see people quoting things from Psalms as though it proves something about theology. I'm not saying that there's no value in Psalms. I'm not saying it shouldn't be in the book. Fine, whatever, put Psalms there. But understand what the Psalms are. They are songs, lamentations, and celebrations. They are hymn books. It would be no different than me walking into a church today, grabbing the hymn book, looking through the lyrics of some of the hymns, and then pointing to some of those lyrics to say, see, this proves my point about Christianity. This proves my point about God. See, this lyric in this song says that God is a giant dinosaur. So because it's a lyric in this song, that means God is a giant dinosaur. And you're thinking, wait a minute, that's a lyric in a song. Why are we even referencing this? Again, I'm not saying that Psalms should be like extracted from the Bible. And I'm not even claiming that there's nothing you can take from the book in terms of wisdom and pretty verses. But to point to Psalms as some kind of revelation about Jesus or as some kind of verification of doctrine is patently ridiculous. Also, so many of the Psalms are so out of context. And I don't just mean you're pulling a verse out of context, but I mean there are entire Psalms that are meant to allude to stories from antiquity that came from the time of the early Bible or before. Sometimes they allude to other rulers or battles that happened. But if you don't understand that context, you're just reading these lyrics and trying to pull meaning from them. And it's ridiculous. And I bring this up because I don't have numbers to support this, but I feel like Psalms is one of the most quoted books in the entire Bible, probably because lyrics and prayers and lamentations are vague in nature. So it's so easy to go into a book like Psalms and find a verse anywhere that backs up almost anything, any point that you want to make. Because they're lyrics, people. They're prayers that someone else made. If I write a prayer that says, oh God, you're amazing. You burst forth in flames and starburst. Now, you can't use that, or you shouldn't use that as some claim then that this is the nature of God. That is someone's prayer. They are by nature hyperbolic. They are by nature poetic. They should never be taken as a basis to verify or justify doctrinal issues. The next thing that Christians sadly don't seem to understand is salvation. Like many of the things on my list, you might think that takes a lot of gall to say such a thing as an atheist. But not only was I a Christian for 40 years, but on top of that, if you really pay attention to it, there is still this kind of never-ending tension, this push-pull from Christians about acts versus faith. Now, I know the lines, by faith we're saved and faith alone and all this. I'm not saying that you're not saved by faith. Ultimately, you can believe you're saved however you want to. But the tension that creates with acts can be palpable. And it leads to a lot of nasty theological questions that Christians don't always do a good job answering. Like, okay, I was saved. I gave my life to Christ, and then I went off and did horrible things. Am I still saved? Now, of course, the dodge will always give you is, well, oh, if you really gave your life to Christ, you wouldn't do those bad things in the first place. Please, we're talking about humans, okay? Even the most saved person can go off the farm tomorrow. Especially because sometimes it's not even by your own volition. Sometimes like brain chemistry, sometimes you get Alzheimer's, sometimes things happen. But my point is not to go down that rabbit hole, but my point is that there's always this tension that Christians usually don't want to acknowledge. But if you actually talk to them and get into these deeper discussions, there is a clear tension between the role that acts play in your salvation versus the role that faith plays in your salvation. And it leads to all kinds of sticky questions like, can you be unsaved? And what happens if the saved do a bad thing? And all these other questions. And quite frankly, I've never heard really good answers for most of them, other than to just hand wave them away and say, well, that's not an issue, because if you're truly walking with Christ, it'll all be good. Yeah, thanks. That's not helpful at all. The next term that Christians don't seem to understand is science. And I'm sorry, but I'm even going to point this at the non-fundamentalist crowd as well, because even if you're talking to someone who's not a fundamentalist, but they are annoyed by your atheism or your agnosticism, one of the quickest, cheapest little digs they will try to throw is to try to say, well, you worship science, or science is a religion. And they will start to infer all these things about science that have nothing to do with science. They will talk about science breathlessly, but in a way that you can tell they don't actually understand how science works. Like, for example, I've heard a number of Christians talk about how fallible science is, which, fine, science is comported by scientists who are humans, who are fallible. But the big difference here between science and your magic sky daddy is science has baked within it the means to correct itself. Science, yes, I'm going to throw this term in there, evolves. Thought evolves. And it doesn't just evolve because someone had a new idea today. They might have a new idea, but if they can confirm it, if they can craft a hypothesis that is then confirmed, and then it moves to being a theory, and we have peer-reviewed papers. And sometimes, yes, even peer-reviewed papers can be removed or withdrawn because they are found to be erroneous. But the point is that scientists are constantly trying to prove themselves wrong, which is the exact opposite of almost all theists. Theists spend so much time just trying to confirm what they think they already know about the universe and their God, etc. I'm not saying that scientists don't ever have some of these biases, of course, because they're human. And sometimes scientists have been caught trying to verify their own data that hasn't truly been verified. You know, there's been scandals and such. But generally speaking, science is always trying to eat itself. It's always trying to disprove whatever they think they know. And in the process of doing so, actually learning much more. That is the antithesis of religion. You don't have to like science. I don't care. But to try to imply some of the things that theists throw at you when they want to throw digs at you for science tells me that they really don't understand what science is or how it works. The next term that Christians just don't understand is slavery. Oh, yeah. I just saw a comment on this today. Someone trying to say again that the Bible doesn't endorse slavery. It doesn't condone it. It just regulates it. Then you don't really know how to read the pages. But more often than not, what I hear from people is this fantasy that when you see slave or slavery in the Bible, that doesn't really mean slavery. It's not like you're thinking, Adam. It's not like chattel slavery in the American South in the 1800s. No, it was a very different kind of slavery. It's the good slavery. I did a whole response video for this dogmatic idiot who made an entire video of his own talking about good slavery. And yes, Christians, not all of them, but a lot of them love to throw around this idea of good slavery. And when you see the ridiculous crap they're trying to shove into the curriculum for like American high schools and junior highs and such, where they are putting in this stuff to imply that slavery wasn't all bad or there was good slavery. They're putting it into the textbooks. And you want to know where they're getting it from? When they're all going to church on Sunday and reading this crap and they can't actually admit what slavery is, this is where it's coming from. Understand what slavery is. And I'm not saying that the slavery of the ancient Levant is 100% identical to the slavery of the American South. But I will say this, all these contentions that Christians make that they are completely different are completely unsubstantiated. It is you injecting your wish onto the text because you don't want to admit that they probably have a lot more in common than they do differences. The next term Christians don't seem to know is what you should always know, truth. Not saying that Christians don't know any truth, but like faith, this is another term that I think gets swapped out It has at least two valid meanings, or at least in this context it does. And they swap this out. Sometimes they do it subconsciously. Sometimes they do it a little more maliciously. But the con game that goes on here is this. They'll try to get on atheists about objective truth and or morality and objective standards and such. But they'll swap out the meaning of truth, because truth can be a philosophical thing, right? It can be your truth. Truth can be the way that you view the universe. Of course, another way to think about truth is objective reality, facts, things that we can empirically measure, things that we can observe. That is also truth. And although the meanings are related, the idea of this philosophical truth, truth of the universe, truth of religion, etc., versus objective, verifiable, observable truth are really two very different things. But Christians will often use them interchangeably. And like I said, sometimes I can't help but think that it's a little bit malicious depending on the conversation that they're having. And finally, the last term, at least for now, that Christians don't seem to have wrapped their head around is Yahweh. I'd done other videos on this, and I have more that are coming out. When I was growing up, at least, I almost never heard the word Yahweh, the name Yahweh. It was only said tangentially with other denominations and other religions. It wasn't until recently I really realized that, hey, this is the name of God. But in most Bibles you're going to read, you're never going to see Yahweh anywhere. You just see Lord. That comes back to the Tetragrammaton, and there's a whole story around that. But I bring this up because if you think that your God's name is God or Lord, it's very easy to never know where your God came from, what your God's history was, what the worshiping history was of the people that worshiped him when we first know that he started cropping up in the ancient Levant. It's easy to never realize that he was a storm god in a pantheon, a polytheistic pantheon of gods. It's easy to never realize that he wasn't even the top god in that pantheon. That was El. Later on, through tradition, he kind of ended up getting melded into El, into one entity. But when they first started worshiping Yahweh and El and Asherah, etc., there was no monotheism. This was a polytheistic pantheon that the ancient Israelites absolutely worshipped. Yahweh was a storm god. Now, I'm not saying that that means you worship a storm god now or that you're polytheistic now. If you worship a single god and you think that he's the magic sky daddy and he's omniscient and omnipresent and all that, then fine. You've essentially created a new god. But the fact is that that's not where Yahweh started. And if you think that Yahweh, or at least the concept of Yahweh, is eternal, then you should really just Google Yahweh. It's not hard. There's so much information out there that really shines a much brighter light on your religion than just what you're seeing in your Bible. Thanks, everyone. As always, I appreciate you being here. Please check me out on future videos. This is Skepticus. This is your boy, Adam of Nola. And until I see you again, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.